All right, so Ed Bailey and Jason Slade, thank you for being with us today. I am going to turn this over to you and hope that the two of you will share a little bit about yourselves to the group that we have here today. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Brenda, and thanks everyone for being on board with this presentation today. My name is Ed Bailey. I'm the director of the Marine Center at Northwestern Michigan College. The Marine Center provides basically professional development, workforce training, custom training around our specialty programs. Specialty programs, primarily the marine technology, geospatial applications, land surveying, and the other technical areas.
Thanks, Brenda, for having us today. I'm Jason Slade. I'm the director of our technical programs here at Northwestern Michigan College. So that encompasses everything from automotive, construction, engineering, tech, surveying, and manufacturing. And so we have our very traditional career and academic paths, which we'll showcase today. But I'm tied in with the Marine Center and Ed Bailey as we look to customize the training that's being offered to our industry partners.
So real quick, what we were going to talk about today is really about micro-credentials, professional development, workforce training, custom training. But the short answer to all of that is NMC does provide that. We have those resources. We are providing, we have, and you'll see them later on, a whole series of micro-credentials around technical competencies. We do customized training. We have been doing this for a while, both pre-Marine Center and during the Marine Center, to a series of clients that range everywhere from manufacturers of tubing to the FBI and Office of Naval Intelligence. So we do a really broad range of things. And so again, kind of the short answer to all of this is we do this. And so what we wanted to focus on today is not so much about what we're currently doing, which I'll show later, but about how we get to those solutions. And that's, so we're really going to focus on, understanding what are the gaps or meeting that need, what are the models that are changing to help find those solutions, because they're evolving both from a customer perspective and from an academic perspective. And then the solution is basically a partnership and how those partnerships can form and be formed. Again, the way this is sort of, outlined is, it begins with, understanding the regional demand. So regional demand is assessments. The Grand Traverse Regional Skills Gap Study was a perfect example of that. It sets the stage. It tells us exactly where the gaps are in the region. But there's also labor surveys, salary surveys, economic, development feedback, and then those relationships we have with corporations. So, we have a strong relationship with the automotive industry. So they're kind of telling us what we need, and so we can build models around that. The second element of that is mobilized training providers. There's a whole series of training providers in this region, in the state, that can help find solutions to this. So they have to be willing to want to really make this happen. From the NMC perspective, that means coming off of our goal of really being an academic organization, focusing on workforce development. Because what that means is accelerated, more flexible options, micro-credentials being an example of that, stackable credentials, and we'll talk about that later. But really, solutions are driven towards value and getting people back in the workforce. All that nets out to being basically corporate partnerships and develop training models that support the corporate partnerships. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of that later.
So what we've been really focusing in on is those skill segments, where those needs reside. And so, like Ed said, we have those traditional academic pathways that do fulfill a lot of those requirements, but we're looking at how do we help our industry partners more quickly? How do we get those skill sets into the hands of the students or of their employees so that they can accelerate through that career ladder, so they can hit that next rung in their job that they need, and they don't want to wait 15 weeks or they don't want to wait 2 years for that. So as we went through this, we met with a series of employers, TC Connected, Traverse Connected, looking at the Grand Traverse region. And so what we identified was that in what we are classifying as skilled trades, now that's very broad, so that's everything from construction to automotive, industrial controls, you can throw IT in there, that there's a huge demand. And so we're seeing the need for those skill sets. And so what we're trying to really focus in on are those skills. What can we jump into quickly and provide some meaningful training and opportunities based off of the academic programs that we already have in place. And tying into that, you can grab the manufacturing piece or the engineering piece, because that all stacks towards what we're calling those skills that we need.
and again, this basically says the same thing. It's a national survey that was done around industry specific. And again, as Jason said, if you aggregate the these categories from the prior slide, that's over 50% of the organization have a skills gap in the technical area. This says almost exact same thing if you look in aerospace, energy, life sciences, others. You know, there's a problem basically. That's what it's kind of stating.
And regionally, we're seeing the same thing. I mean, all of us on this call and all of us here within the division, we have outreach all the time with employers that need specific skill sets. And right now, our answer usually has been to enroll them in a traditional pathway. And so what we can do is kind of leverage some of these skills to help them get there quickly. But these national trends are seen at the regional level.
The other thing that's changing in terms of skill training is the slide calls it public point of view, but it's what our customers are really expecting. When you look at expectations, you know, there's more of an interest in streamlined courses. There's more reliance of relevance to specific areas of interest. They want to make sure there's value added to it, and then there's stackability, make it stackable. And so all of that leads towards things like micro-credentials, professional development, training. And so a huge percentage of that, and then the next slide also says basically the same thing, is that, you know, this is an educational survey, but over 50% are interested in non-degree credentialing and or skills training. And so that drives and should be driving models in education to move towards that type of format and that type of programming.
Yeah, and looking at this trends, we're seeing that locally as well, and we're hearing that from our partners. And I think one thing to remember is just because somebody's going that route, that's looking at the skills training or non-degree credentialing, doesn't mean that they're deviating away from a traditional pathway. They're just looking for those milestones that take them up that career path or up that program pathway. So our goal with some of this, looking at the trend lines, is to be able to identify mechanisms to give them those experiences. So how do we help that learner that's looking for that non-degree credential or that skills training, while eventually maybe still being able to offer them a degree later on using the skills they've already obtained?
And again, you know, the education sector, as I said, is also recognizes this as well and sees these trends in higher ed that are moving towards, you know, lifelong learning and upskilling, you know, personalization across industries. And that's really what the micro credentials does, is allows to personalize to meet a set of skills that a particular industry may want. And again, we've talked about this, but it's a focus on shorter skill specific credentials versus degree programming. There's a little background on NMC and the regional impact. And I think the thing that's probably most important is that currently NMC supports 1 out of every 22 jobs in the region, which I think is a pretty significant thing. You can see the rest of the data here. Again, this was a survey that was done, or impact survey that was completed a couple of years ago, but I think it's still relevant today. And then finally, you know, kind of moving to what NMC is doing. And it's really moving towards this competency-based models, which allows for students to enter programs through multiple pathways. So there's always been the traditional pathway. There's a military, which we've expanded on, and then there's the workforce and prior learning experience. So by letting them enter into that pathway and focus on core competencies, we can develop these accelerated learning strategies around, again, competencies, industry credentials, and micro credentials, which is really the focus of today's presentation, all leading towards what we would call then a degree progression as well. So it becomes that stackable component where you can go from associates to bachelor's and then the graduate programs. Again, all of that can be done at NMC.
Yeah, and this is still a work in progress. I mean, this is something that we're working through, that we're experimenting with, and that, you know, we're willing to try. But long term, for the viability of the college and of our programs, we need to have these opportunities to allow people to enter and exit, to join the workforce, to come back based on economic conditions, and to be able to kind of pick back up where they started. And that's a little bit different than some of other pathways that we have here at the college, which really expect you to start at point A and not to leave until you've finished that credential or that degree at that point. So looking at this, I mean, it's been a learning curve for us all, but it's something that we're really excited about because it does allow students to enter and exit as they please, and also reward them and award them for earning those competencies.
And I think Jason made a really good point. You know, it is a work in progress because it should be. I mean, part of the solution is meeting the workforce demands. Those demands do change. They're specific to certain industries. Industry sectors have different needs, and so we need a model that allows some flexibility to that. And you'll hear us use the word, agile response and more, quicker return around and response. Those are the kind of solution that we're trying to build with this model. But at the same time, it allows for it to be kind of an in-process model for a big part of the time as we figure out solutions. Kind of transitioning over to some of the technical areas that we're of experience.
Yeah, and so these kind of became the foundations or the cornerstones for some of our operations. It made sense to kind of leverage the skills and areas that we already had experience in and actually do a pretty good job in, I think. And so, we run out of whether it's our engineering tech program or marine tech or manufacturing, a very strong subset of technical skills focused around electronics and electrical, fluid power, CAD, so drafting and design. And then getting into some of our specialty areas, whether that would be drones, so our unmanned systems, both aerial and then also marine level, so our ROV sonar systems, data processing. And then you kind of can start adding in our surveying piece, which is something we just added a few years ago. And these all lead to the traditional technical degree pathways that you see in the upper right. So we know that we can drive somebody into an engineering tech degree or an engineering transfer degree or something on there. So we have that experience already and something that we're willing to leverage. The key would be down in that professional development space on the bottom left.
Mm-hmm. And I think before I talked to that a little bit more, I've talked about collaboration and business models. And so we have a couple of really good examples that are doing really well for us. For example, our survey technology degree or surveying degree. It is a 2-year degree that was basically presented to us as, from industry. Leica Geosystems is a huge provider of survey technologies to basically the world. They recognize the need, they provide the equipment for us, and so they lowered our barrier, but they support our program. And so that kind of partnership works really well for us. Same with Munson and the biomed technician. There was a demand there, and so we found a way to find a solution. And it's that partnership, because they again also provide equipment that we may not otherwise have. So as Jason said, back to the professional development, what we have done is we have taken these core competencies and degree pathways and all the assets, both equipment, facilities, and instructors, and spun them into a professional development program. So we focused on really, which is what the Marine Center does, is focus on geospatial applications, which is surveying, UAS, and sort of that type of technology. And then marine technology, which is even our core. I'm not sure how many people know this, but we're the only school in the country that offers a bachelor's level degree in marine technology. Our graduates get 100% placement. We have huge industry support from global corporations. They typically take more graduates. We take more graduates than we have. And so, we have taken and leveraged both the equipment and those relationships to build this professional development program, and are now partnering with several of these schools as part of these companies to be their technology or their equipment training provider.
And Katie, like a little side note on there, this can be as simple as us just taking what would traditionally be a credit class and rolling it into something that maybe meets 4 times a week for 8 hours, or maybe is ran at night or on weekends or things like that. Or it can be as sophisticated as dropping back and working directly with the employer to identify those skill sets that we want for them, which we'll get into in more depth. But that kind of differentiates between the what we call the traditional technical credit side and what we can do at the PD level, which is much more agile and flexible.
So, kind of to come back to what the topic of the presentation was on micro-credentials and our approach to this. And, we've talked about this a fair amount, but, when we design a micro-credential, build a micro-credential, it's really what you would call data informed. Is there economic data? And like the DC Connect report clearly shows there's a gap. So is it employer driven and validated? I mean, do they want to be part of it? It clearly needs to be accelerated delivery and flexible, and we'll show that. It should be stackable. And then it should be affordable and ROI driven. I think this is a trend you will hear more and more in education is, what is my return on investment? If I'm going to spend multiple thousands of dollars on education, what am I going to get back for it in terms of careers or jobs or future opportunities? And then the last one, which is equally as important, or probably should be the most important, is it meaningful for employers? Meaning, does it have credibility for an employer that say this person received this credential or this micro credential or this certificate from NMC that adds value to them as an employee to us in the workplace? So a couple of them, and so I'll start this and really Jason finish, but we really have three what we call pathways in micro credentials. They're the technical, there's a marine technology, and there's a geospatial. So this is a listing of our current technical pathways.
Yeah, so what we tried to do is, again, this is, like I said, this is a work in progress, and we try to work directly with our customers and industry partners and those interested in developing these. So what we did is we set out and we kind of laid the framework for some major overarching topics. So for instance, our electrical systems and troubleshooting, our PLC applications. And then we identified some of the competency areas. So if I stick with like the PLC application side, well, here we have a programmable logic controller. This is PLCs are used throughout the region, throughout the state. You see them in every manufacturing facility, and you're also seeing them at places you wouldn't expect. So some of our local ski slopes actually use PLCs for some of their automation, whether it would be the lift system they have there, or even some of the control systems associated with the snowmaking process. Well, that's a skill set. That's a skill set that takes time to develop on there. And so as a technical pathway, it makes sense to offer that as a competency area. So we're saying, hey, here you can come to NMC. You don't necessarily need to go through our credit side. We'd love to have you, obviously, right. If I put my director of technical academic programs hat on. But if this works better for you in terms of gaining those skills, then we would like to offer you this opportunity to focus on this competency area. And then we have courses associated with it. So we have an industrial controls class, which deals with some of the electrical side of the house. And then we actually have some PLC classes. Now, these could be credit courses that we're offering, maybe at the particular semester, or maybe this is some customized training that we're rolling out later to give you those skill sets. But the bottom line is when you come out of these experiences, you should be competent in a basic level of programmable logic controllers. And then that's expanded out to the other areas as well.
And again,
Jason,
yeah.
Val has a question. How far do the micro credentials mean something? Is it just for the local industry, or could the learner go somewhere else in Michigan or another state and have it be recognized by the employer?
So that is actually a great point, Brenda. And that's an interesting one that we can look at from a couple different ways. So when we have the micro credentials standalone, let's say in that PLC side of the house on there, that would service obviously the local industry very well. A person could go down to other parts of Michigan or even the Midwest and apply that skill set. What they would run into some issues would be trying to make that transferable into another institution. So let's say they ended up in a neighboring state, they wanted to get an associate's degree. So that's where we can come in. We have mechanisms in place here at the college to help them with some of the competency-based or the ability to articulate credit from what we call the non-credit side of the house to the credit side. And then once we package it into a credit platform, then we see colleges more likely to take that into their system and allow it to be used towards their degree. So when you're dealing with a specific skill set like PLCs, a lot of times an employer just wants to see that skill. What they're more curious about is what platform did you learn on? What language was it? How comfortable are you with integration? And show me some examples that you can do it. It's when it becomes to the educational side of the house that we see that there's a larger demand for us to be able to show some side of course credit with that. Bigger picture, you're seeing some areas, construction, for example, going to more of a national accreditation model or assessment model. And so Keith's familiar with this from the IT world, is you can have some standardized testing or credentials that back some of these skill sets. So for instance, the construction side, NCCER will validate the skill sets of the learner, and then he or she can kind of take that with them, that portfolio, and show it off to other companies or institutions that also use that that type of assessment software. So it kind of gets down to what the program area is, what the skill sets are, and what the expectations from industry are. Is there an expectation that there's a third-party credential or assessment that goes with it, or are they more interested in that skill set? So broad answer, just because it's so unique or dependent on the area that he or she is going into.
Yeah, and I think it's important because we try to line some of these up with, for example, there are some really good industry certifications out there that doesn't necessarily add value for us to try to offer that or compete with other organizations. So, but maybe as a follow-up to that question, which is a great question, is, I mean, first of all, the concept of micro-credentials is kind of the wild, wild west right now. So it's still trying to figure out its plan. But in the marine technology area, and you can see we have actually 4 micro-credentials. There are no really industry certifications. In fact, we hold the only accreditation for certification in the country. These 4 areas are exactly what industry is looking for. It's built with industry. So if you took a marine data processing micro-credential to almost any company in the marine field, they would understand exactly what that meant and what their expectations were for. So again, it's kind of, as Jason articulated really well, it's kind of a maybe answer or depends answer. So again, I'll close loop on these. You know, these are the 4 big areas. We've linked them to our classes, and I'll talk a little bit how you would actually process them. I think it's also important to note as part of this is we have a class listed down there called Keras, HIPS, and SIPS. That is a very technical software package that actually we have partnered with another company to help deliver. So again, we're granting the micro-credential, but we're doing it partly in partnership with industry so that they're getting that sort of specialization. The third category is really,
yeah, our geospatial pathways. So, you know, leveraging the fact that we have a drone program that just celebrated its 10-year anniversary last year. It's one of the first in the country that was established. But what we're seeing is more and more of those skill sets are needed in other areas. So whether it's a surveying company that requires some drone operation, or we have maybe a real estate developer that needs to use drones in their applications, you know, how can we quickly give them some sort of credential to aid them in that pathway? So maybe it's getting a tag along to a license they already have or a degree they already have, but we're able to offer those opportunities. And the same thing falls away into our surveying fundamentals area. Having such a strong industry-backed program, as Ed talked about with our surveying technology, we're seeing a real demand for people with just some of the basic skill sets around the fundamentals of surveying. You know, the basic operations, the basic CAD that backs it up, and some of that. So what we're trying to do is give those skills early and often in a micro-credential format, allowing that person to enter the workforce, hopefully, and then circle back and maybe complete our degree.
and then finally, kind of how these things actually work. So here's an example of a micro-credential. So if you take the marine data processing micro-credential, it's actually a series of 4 courses. You can see the sequence that you can actually take them in 2 together. And the idea is that you can actually receive this credential in 6 months. It costs about $1,250 per course. And it's all online. So for an individual that's really interested in this specific area of the marine technology field, they have an opportunity to do this through us relatively quickly and relatively inexpensive compared to others, and be in the field practicing. And this is something that the industry really recognizes in terms of data processing in this field. So, and then maybe just, you know, in closure, because I'm going to wrap us back around sort of the first slide that we presented is, you know, when you look at the first thing, we understand or think we understand right now the regional demand. And it's again, it's a shortage of skilled workforce. It's impacting business development area. You know, the second piece of it is NMC's willingness to support and move and be flexible in the workforce and find solutions that work for both employers and potential students that add value. And it's all because, and continues to be, and I think the message we want to leave with is that it's that collaboration that allows us to be flexible and build models that work for everybody. And again, as far as, you know, in terms of next steps and those on the webinar, you know, if there's interest in this kind of stuff, it starts with a conversation and allows us to sort of begin to build these models out that make sense. And they can be small, they can be large.
Yeah, I mean, really, from our standpoint, we think either in-house we have the skill sets needed to allow someone to gain these skills, or like Ed said, we're not afraid to partner on there. If there's an industry partner out there or another institution, or a training body that might be able to offer that service better than we can, then we'd love to partner up, because what we can do is we can help package that. And so really our goal is to work with not only industry partners, but also individuals looking to upskill and figure out, okay, what are you looking for? And then once we have that and that initial conversation, that allows us to customize it. So, we had that initial list of micro credentials and the pathways associated with it. Well, that's what we've seen demand for so far. But that doesn't mean that we have them all on there. And so what we're looking for is that input of like, hey, this could be an opportunity for you to expand or something that we can do. The other nice thing, as Ed kind of alluded to, is we can be way more nimble with the microcontrollers. So, or the micro credentials on there. With our academic programs, and rightfully so, they have to follow a very rigorous accreditation and reaccreditation process. So as we make adjustments in a program, it can be tedious. With the micro-credential side of the house, we can flip a switch and rapidly deploy a new skill set or rapidly deploy a new class based on demand, and then work it back into our traditional academic and technical curriculum when it's appropriate or when it's even necessary.
Do you have an example of another institution that you're working with right now? Have you started partnering with any of the local universities?
Yes, and so one of the things that we try to do quite often, especially with our technical skills on there, is we look to see where we can get similar skill sets from another institution. So that could be their credit arm or their professional development arm. And so we have a couple industry partners that are located on the southwest side of the state, where it does not make sense for them to come up all the time and take our courses that have some commonality. And so Ed and I have identified institutions around the Grand Rapids area that are able to deploy some of those skill sets, and we have them take the classes right there. And then they come to us for some of those specific skills. It just makes sense. I mean, I teach electronics and electrical, so I can say it, but you can take an electronics or electrical class anywhere, you can, and the skill sets remain relatively similar. And so what we try to do is offer customization and look at those pieces as we go. Expanding on that, we've had some initial meetings with a number of institutions over the last year about partnering more on some of these opportunities, because what that allows to do is expand geographically. Traverse City it's a beautiful place, but it also can be somewhat of a difficult place to get to, especially if you're coming from southeast or southwest side of the state. And so we have ongoing conversations around how do we make those connections on there. And so Brenda, some of those aren't formal, but it's something we're still exploring.
And maybe Brenda, just to expand on that example. So you saw one of the micro credentials, and I referred to the CARIS course. We partnered on that with a company called Frugro. Frugro is probably the largest provider of geospatial data in the world. They run multiple large vessels around the world all day long, aerial platforms. And so they have what's called a Frugro Academy, which offers this course. For students coming into the marine industry, first thing they do when they hire them, they put them into this CARIS course. And so what we've done by offering this as a micro credential, we've shortcut that process so they can get that micro credential and then go directly to Frugro and begin working in the field, as opposed to waiting 6 months to complete the course. And Brenda, I don't know if you're going to monitor the chat. I did see a question about Tara in there.
Yes. The question is, how or are you working with Tara, Traverse City Association of Human Resource? Is it Traverse Area Human Resource Association? To make sure the position descriptions and hiring processes are being updated to focus on micro-credentials achievement in the job application process. It's a good question, Val.
Short answer is probably no, but we should and would like to. And so if we could find a way to reach out and start that process, that would be great.
Yeah, I can help make that connection. I'll do that. Good question, Val.
I think the value that we wanted to get out of it today was to start those conversations and understand, while we think we may know some of these gaps, how do we better service those gaps? Because it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. And if there's solutions like Tara or other organizations that we can be helpful, and we would love to get in front of that group to present. So I can't see who the question came from, but if be glad to be part of that.
It was Valerie. Valerie, are you a part of that association? Yeah, no, I wasn't sure, but I can, we work closely with Tara, so I'll make sure the two of you are introduced.
That would be great. Thanks, Brenda. It's
Val?
what we had. I don't know if there's other questions specific that we can help, if we could answer.
Valerie?
Yeah, so kind of the way that I'm connected to this today and what brought me to this session today was that I work for a nationwide company, and part of my job is to help our employees who are virtual all across the country find educational resources, find essentially micro credentials or things like that. And I, for one, want the money that is going to be spent on those pathways to be spent at NMC, because NMC is in my backyard. So do you have anything like, how could we think about these micro credentials, or have you done any thinking about micro credentials that could be done virtually? I'm not completely, it's not a fully fleshed out idea. I saw this session and I was like, hey, I'd like to have the money spent in my backyard.
I think the short answer is yes. I mean, I think we would want to have a conversation around those skills. I mean, the biggest challenge for us, to be honest, is especially when it comes to technical training is applied and hands-on. And some of that stuff is really hard to do, locally, but it doesn't, or, virtually. But there are a lot of courses that we offer that could be offered virtual or live stream that may be of value to, at a national level. The other thing we can do, and Jason mentioned this earlier, we can partner with other schools. So let's say someone's interested in electronics or some other skill sets. They could take some of those electronics at their local community college, whether it's downstate or Ohio or wherever they are, and then transfer that into us, and we can then offer that micro-credential by providing the rest of the training. So we can partner to be about as creative as you would like. I think that creates some level of difficulty to explain, but we can be that. And so maybe, Valerie, we have an offline conversation about where you feel the needs are, and we can find some solutions.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing. I just, for your awareness, my, I guess, industry would be data analytics. We've got a lot of data scientists, and we're using software to look at big data related to investments in rural communities all across the nation. So yeah, I mean, it's stuff that we can access from anywhere, and not so much the technical or the marine stuff that you guys are talking about, that you really do need that hands-on piece. Our hands-on piece would be on a computer. Right. So yeah.
And I think you nailed it. I mean, obviously we started with our focus around the areas that we had a lot of expertise in, but that's from our own division. I mean, we can expand out and bring in other partners and go into some of those areas that you're talking about. And you're absolutely right. That could all be done remotely because we don't need that.
Well, and as I mentioned at the onset, there's also lots of other providers in the region. Keith Kelly's on this call, part of TC Codes. There's an opportunity maybe that you could partner with them, not understanding the need or the offerings that they may have if there's a fit, but it doesn't mean we couldn't be that liaison to try to find a solution to keep those. I love your idea of keeping the training dollars in the region. So make that the objective and then go from there.
Go ahead, Emily, did you have a question?
I do. It's sort of aimed at Jason because we were in the room together about a year and a half ago, or maybe it was 2 years ago, I don't know, talking about micro-credentialing. And in that case, it was a specific local business asking about extremely specific training. Jason, are you with me? Do you remember? Yeah. So I get, my question isn't so much about kind of how that all turned out. It's more general based on that conversation. Does that sort of scenario end up being worth it for you guys?
So no, you're absolutely right. So That's what we have to look at on there.
Yeah.
In the situation, similar situations, what you're talking about, sometimes it really is on there. We just, we have contracts for some customized training coming up. That's very industry focused. We just wrapped up one in July that was right in our wheelhouse when it comes to industrial controls, some fabrication, some other things. And so, Emily, in that standpoint, when we have the expertise available, and we know we have a pool of people that are interested in participating, that's some of the biggest thing. But if we know that we have a contingent of people that want to be part of it, most definitely it is. And I think one of the things that Ed and I are really comfortable with is trying it once and seeing what happens, and seeing what were those resources that it took to accomplish that, and did the student and the company feel that they got some value out of it. And that's the key part. They can feel like they got something out of that experience. But most of the time it can. The only time I would say that we haven't been able to accommodate people that have made the request is when we only have one participant. It just ends up becoming really cost prohibitive for what they're looking to do on there. And so what we try to do in those cases is find them other partners that maybe, or other institutions that may offer what they want at a national level.
And I think to add to that, I think one of the things that it's important to us is we want to be a role in making Traverse City, this region, support talent attraction and be a destination for employers, not just for vacationers. And so the ability to provide that technical training to help employers support their business and or grow here is important. So we are willing to give it a try. I mean, we are, at the bottom line, still have to make some money at this and has to be practical. But at the same point, it would be great for us to try some, because you never know where this is going to go. Up to my example surveying, it started with a conversation and then it kind of blew up into a full program. And so these are the kind of things I think we want to pursue. And so, yes, Jason already said it, but echo his comments, let's give it a shot.
Yeah.
We like those. And as you know, Emily, from our conversations, we want that employer to come just approach us and let's sit down and figure out what those objectives are. And does it make sense? And how can we make it work out? I mean, the previous conversation we had this summer with an industrial controls group on there, we were able to come up with a solution that worked out fantastic for them. Skill sets that worked, did not tap into, didn't create too much downtime for the production facility. And we're able to kind of train up their workforce rather rapidly.
And we also work in conjunction with, there's a lot of state and federal funding for training as well. We can partner with that. I mean, a big part of that training Jason described, they had some specific criteria so that they could get federal and state funding. And we help support that as well.
Can I ask one more question? This is sort of institutional. So, a couple of weeks ago, there was some press about NMC's enrollment numbers. And I wonder if their enrollment numbers that they report out account for the micro-credentialing side of the house, to use your language, or is that just the for credit?
It only counts, Emily, if they came through the traditional admissions pathway. So they would have had to apply as a student, take a credit class. So like, for instance, the training that Ed and I ran this summer, or Ed, I should say the Marine Center ran this summer, does not count, right? The one that we have coming up in a couple of Fridays does not count on there.
Yeah.
The other thing that I didn't mention, and one of the values that we think brings as part of our micro-credential program, is you can enter it as, for example, you, Emily, if you want to take that micro-credential, you just go to our class registration site, you sign up, and you go. You don't have to apply to NMC, where your transcripts are, and all the other stuff that comes along with going to college. Not that that's bad, but most people who are in a professional environment don't really want to do. Like if I had to go find my high school transcripts, I don't even think high school exists anymore. And so those kind of things become really barriers and people stop. They're like, forget it, I'll go someplace else. So that helps. That's one of those simplifying things I feel like we've added.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So Katie has a question here, but before I ask your question, Katie, I'm wondering, Ed and Jason, if those organizations that you're working with, do you have permission from them to maybe highlight the work that you've done with them? Just wondering on getting the communications out to other organizations to utilize the services that you offer in the micro-credentialing, if that might be something that we can help with. So just put a pin in that. and then I'll ask Katie's question. You can answer it, or are you already doing that maybe? I don't.
The answer is we probably should ask. I'll be honest, and this is just my personal feeling, is that we have some of the best programs nobody knows about. And so partly it's because we do a lousy job of touting our own home. We tend to do this stuff and move on. But it is a really good idea, Brenda, to try to find a way to partner to help with some of that.
Well, I do know there are plenty of organizations out there that we talk to day in and day out that could certainly, we try and share the information with them, but if we have pure examples of how they've been able to grow their workforce or their bottom line by micro-credentialing their team, that would be, an eye-opener for some business owners. All right, so I'll ask Katie's question next, and then I see Shannon here on the screen, so I'm thinking you have a question too. So Katie asked, do you think that the current economic climate is a factor in the desire for quick training solutions? And do you think if hiring in the region gets better, this trend for micro-credentialing will continue? Good question.
Katie, that's a great question. I'll jump in that one. I think yes, and I think in a good way. So the beauty of the micro-credential is right now we're seeing across the board in our areas the per dollar wage really just skyrocket, and that's just the need for people with technical skill sets. And so the beauty of the micro-credential is I can bring you in, you can train for a while, and you can jump out into that workforce and begin working. If the demand subsides a little bit or even retracts, the beauty of the micro-credentials and one of the things that we strive for here is that they can become part of our credit pathways. So let's say it does slow down a little bit and you now have the opportunity to finish up that associate's degree or get that advanced credential or take some high-end training in the marine side, we're ready for you. We have the benefit, Ed can talk about this more, we already see that in our marine side of the house. And so when we work with marine industries, it's go, 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 go. They need to upskill quickly in spring, summer, and fall. And then come January 1st, it subsides a little bit for them. And so then they're willing to come in and take more classes, take more academic classes, and push themselves harder towards a degree and certificate. So I think you're right, but I think that's the beauty of those micro-credentials is you can jump in, get that skill, get that job, or move up in that career ladder. And then if it does slow down a bit, well, let's see what that full-term or longer-term goal looks like for you. Do you need to finish that degree? Do you need to get another skill set? What can we do?
I think the other economic driver that's happening is a lot of employers are actually hiring people that have sort of the right aptitudes for the employee, that company, and then putting them in school for the technical training. And I think that piece of it lends itself really well for the micro-credentials, again, because it's kind of a quick solution that gives them the skill sets that they want to move up that ladder.
Yeah. Hi, good to see everyone. Ed and Jason, I know that this is specific to the technical area, but I feel like we're in similar conversations around just employer needs. And I can never navigate exactly where to go at NMC, if it's extended education, if it's so I was just wondering if maybe you could speak to that, if it's something outside, if it's healthcare, if it's education, what does that structure look like at NMC?
Shannon, real quick, you did not offend us on that one because you hear the same thing from us on there. And actually, Ed alluded to it at the beginning. We're in the process of going through some strategic realignment here at the college in the ability to better showcase, whether it's professional development, workforce, whatever, there needs to be a single on-ramp on there. And so you're 100% right, and your analysis there, and you're actually somebody that's relatively close to the college and understands how we work, and it's still difficult for you to figure that out.
Right.
So then I'm going to point at Ed right here and let him solve it.
I mean, we recognize that as a problem, and we're trying to figure some of that out. And I think we will, over the next 6 months, get there. My advice is to keep calling the college to get someone who gets you the right answer. I know that sounds like a horrible solution. Jason and I's numbers are up there. You call us, we can try to point you in the right direction. Because, for example, healthcare is not under our area of responsibility, but we know who it is. And so we can point you in that direction. If there's something around, like even information technology, we can point you in the direction of Keith, some of the IT folks as well. So we can try to get you until we get this figured out. And
it's helpful to know that you guys are navigating that. I feel like, again, I know enough people at NMC to get to the right place, but just as a community member, I can appreciate that it might not.
It's a recognized issue, Shannon, and unfortunately the solution hasn't come quickly yet, but we feel like it's going to be resolved.
And for me, Shannon, I mean, I'm glad you brought it up because it is one of the single biggest issues we have. Because if you're a professional looking for training, you know, you have a limited bandwidth of what you're going to try to process. And at some point, you're going to say, this is ridiculous. Like, if I can't find it quickly, they probably can't provide the training I want, and you're going to move elsewhere. Because there's a lot of people that will provide it. And so it's really important if we're going to be effective in the community and, right to Katie's, drive some of our economic numbers, we have to figure this out. So we will.
I was just going to say too, from the academic advising standpoint with our more traditional programming, Shannon, that is a question that we get regularly. And I think Ed and Jason are right when they say, you know, reaching out to those people that you know may not know exactly the answer, but will work to get it for you right now is our short-term solution. And then going back to our strategic planning, that is exactly the conversations that we're having behind the scenes right now to try and make that process more efficient and expanded.
Keith, I feel like you're the only one that's been kind of quiet today. You have anything to add?
No, I really don't. Obviously, I'm aware of a lot of this because I am faculty at NMC and I actually work for these two gentlemen. So I just really wanted to, hear what the community presentation was about and see who was interested. So
Great.
Nothing really more to add. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Anyone have any parting thoughts?
I was just going to say too, going back to the question that I asked earlier, in this whole strategic planning process and doing a lot of this research in higher education and studying this new trend, in general, prior learning assessment has been shown to affect retention for academic programs. And so if students are able to do these programs that Ed and Jason have developed, statistics show that they are more likely to come back and complete a degree. So I think it's a very cyclical way that we can really enhance what we're offering in general at NMC and affect the student life cycle. So it's really exciting to hear that community members are wanting to see that expand more, because I think NMC wants it to expand more too.
Ed, Jason?
I guess my takeaway would be kind of like to Emily's point earlier, she was actually probably ahead of the micro-credential curve, but she got to be part of the first recipient of hearing how it would work, is exactly what she said. As you're working with the community, and Valerie, as you brought up too, if you hear of people that have a need or a industry, that sector that's struggling, please send them to Ed and I's way on there. We can help make those connections and figure out what might work for them or where they should potentially look. And that allows to connect with Keith and with others out there to find that right relationship. So that would be my takeaway message is, that we're here and we're more than just that academic catalog that you see.
And I would agree with Jason. Probably the only thing else is thanks to those that are on the call today for taking the time and asking the questions. It helps understand, where their interests and where their opportunities. So I think we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you to both of you for being with us today. We appreciate you and taking the time to share how NMC is going to continue to help our business owners and businesses grow. So with that, all of you have a great afternoon.
Thanks. Yes.
Hey, thank you, everybody.